welcome to the Deep Dive. You've brought us some really fascinating stuff this time.
Hope so.
And as always, we're going to dive deep, pull out the most interesting bits for you all. Today, it's a real historical head-scratcher. The 1883 solar observation by Mexican astronomer José Bonilla.
Yeah, it's quite a story. So back in August 1883, for 2 days, Bonilla photographed hundreds. Actually, it was 447 exactly.
447. Wow.
Unidentified objects moving across the sun. Caused a bit of a stir then, and honestly, people are still talking about it, still debating what he saw.
Absolutely. And our sources, we've got Bonilla's original report from L'Astronomie, plus modern research papers looking back at it all.
Right, the reanalyses.
Yeah. So the mission today, our deep dive goal, is to figure out, what did Bonilla actually see? How did scientists react back then?
And there's that modern explanation too, the comet idea.
Exactly, the comet idea. Plus, why does this nearly 140-year-old event still pop up, even in, early UFO discussions?
It touches on a lot of things.
Okay, let's get into it. Who was this José Bonilla?
Well, José Bonilla, he was important in Mexican astronomy. He was the director of the Zacatecas Observatory, which was brand new then, just opened in December 1882. And his background was in engineering, but crucially also astrophotography.
Ah, so he had the skills.
Definitely. He knew how to use the tech, which was pretty cutting edge for the time, to not just see, but, record things properly.
So what exactly happened? Describe the event itself.
Okay, so August 12th and 13th, 1883. He's got clear skies for, about 3.5 hours total observation time. Yeah. And during that window, he sees all these objects transiting the sun. And he photographs them, gets those 447 images using the collodion process.
By the wet plate method?
Yeah, that one. I mean, taking that many photos over that time period, it clearly wasn't just like a passing flock of birds or something mundane. He knew it was unusual.
So he took all these pictures, wrote it up for L'Astronomie. What did he say he saw? What did they look like?
His descriptions are key. He said they look kind of fuzzy or misty.
Fuzzy, okay.
And many had dark tails streaming behind them.
Tails?
Ecolife.
Comets.
Well, that's the later interpretation. He also noted something really weird. They looked dark against the sun, obviously, but seemed luminous, like bright, when they went off the edge of the sun.
That is odd.
And importantly, he was careful. He just presented the data, his observations. He didn't push a specific theory about what they were, just here's what I saw.
Proper scientific approach.
Yeah.
What else did he note in the report? Anything else significant?
Yeah, a couple of things. Big one. Nobody else saw it. He told the observatories in Mexico City and Puebla, which aren't that far away.
Relatively speaking.
Right. But they didn't see anything. And that lack of confirmation, that definitely fueled the skepticism later on.
I bet. Anything else?
Yeah, the transit times varied. Some zipped across in maybe 1/3 of a second. Others took a full second.
So not uniform speed?
No. And he saw them alone, but also in groups, sometimes 15 or 20 clustered together.
Okay, so definitely not birds then.
Yeah.
Clusters of fuzzy things with tails. What did the science community make of it at the time? Flammarion, who published it.
Skeptical. Very skeptical. Flammarion himself leaned towards, the usual suspects.
Birds, bugs, dust.
Exactly. Dust, maybe high-altitude insects, birds, anything conventional. And the fact that only Bonilla saw it, that was a big red flag for them.
Made it seem like a local phenomenon or maybe an instrument issue.
Precisely. So in the late 19th century, it just kind of remained this weird, unexplained data point that didn't really fit anywhere.
Until, fast forward to 2011. This modern idea pops up, the comet fragment hypothesis. This is where it gets wild.
It really does. So these researchers, Mantarola, Ramos Lara, and Cordero, they look back at everything and propose something pretty dramatic.
Which was?
That Bonilla actually saw the debris trail of a comet that had broken up, fragmented, and passed really close to Earth.
Whoa, okay. How does that explain things? Like why only Zacatecas saw it?
Parallax. That's their big explanation for the limited visibility.
Right, the angle thing.
Exactly. They calculated that if these fragments were pretty close, and their numbers suggest they were, maybe only 500 to 8,000 kilometers up.
That's really close, astronomically speaking.
Very close. So from Zacatecas, they'd appear to cross the sun, but from Mexico City or Puebla, the angle's just slightly different.
And they'd miss the sun's disk entirely, like holding your finger close to your face.
Precisely that. It neatly explains why it was such a localized sighting.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What about the appearance? The fuzzy look, the dark tail.
So it fits perfectly, doesn't it? Comet fragments are fuzzy. They have a coma, that cloud of gas and dust. And as they break up and travel, they leave trails of dust and gas. Seen against the sun, those would look like dark tails. Bonilla's description matches up surprisingly well.
Okay, this theory is sounding pretty solid. Did they estimate, like, how big these things were, or how many?
They did. Based on his photos and the parallax idea, they figured the fragments could be anywhere from, say, 70 meters up to maybe 800 meters wide, some even longer, up to a kilometer.
Not small, then.
Not small at all. And the really mind-blowing part, they estimated there might have been over 3,000 fragments in total if the comet broke up over about a day.
3,000.
Yeah. And the original comet, its mass could have been huge, comparable to Halley's comet, maybe even bigger. We're talking potentially trillions, maybe quadrillions of kilograms.
Good grief. That scale is almost unimaginable.
Yeah.
And didn't they connect this to Tunguska?
They did. That's the really sobering part. They drew a direct line to the 1908 Tunguska event, the airburst over Siberia.
Yeah. Flattened millions of trees.
Right. They said if these thousands of fragments Bonilla saw had actually hit Earth, instead of just passing close by.
Catastrophe.
Absolute catastrophe. Potentially an extinction-level event, like hundreds of thousands of Hiroshima bombs going off. It really puts Bonilla's observation in a new light, maybe a record of a massive near-miss.
Wow. Okay. So a potential planetary disaster narrowly averted.
Yeah.
But you said people still debate it. This comet theory isn't universally accepted?
No, it's not quite sewn up. There are definitely critiques, valid questions.
Like what? What are the main sticking points?
Well, for one, if a massive comet broke up that close, you'd expect a pretty spectacular meteor shower afterward.
With all that debris hitting the atmosphere.
Exactly. But there are no historical reports of a major meteor storm around that time, which is odd.
Huh. Okay, that's a fair point. Anything else?
Some scientists question if parallax alone really explains why only Zacatecas saw it. They think maybe Earth's rotation should have brought it into view for other places over the observation period.
Okay.
And, the simpler explanation hasn't gone away entirely. Could it still have been something much closer, like out-of-focus insects or dust very near the telescope lens?
The old Flammarion argument?
Still lingers. Also, there have been some orbital mechanics studies. People tried to link it to Comet Ponsbrook's, which was around then.
Right.
But the calculations apparently don't quite line up perfectly for Ponsbrook's to be the source shedding fragments on that specific path at that time.
So the specific comet origin is maybe questionable.
Potentially. And finally, that weird observation Bonilla made the objects looking bright off the edge of the sun. That's not typical for how we usually see comet fragments against the sky. They tend to be dark unless they're actively, flaring up somehow.
Okay, so definitely still some holes or unanswered questions in the comet theory, compelling as it is.
Right. It's a strong candidate, but maybe not the final word.
Let's zoom out a bit.
Yeah.
What was astronomy like in 1883? What was the context?
It was actually a really exciting time for astronomy. Telescope tech was leaping forward, bigger refractors, better reflectors being developed.
And photography, too, you mentioned.
Huge. Astrophotography was becoming a serious tool, not just a novelty. It allowed for permanent records, detailed study, exactly what Bonilla was doing.
And they knew comets could break up back then.
Oh, yeah. The idea of cometary fragmentation was known. They were understood to be fragile. So the concept of seeing fragments wouldn't have been totally alien. And observatories then often did more than just stargaze. They were vital for things like accurate timekeeping for the whole region, even mapping work geodesy.
So multi-purpose science hubs. What about the Zacatecas Observatory specifically? It was new.
Brand new, yeah. Opened December 82. Bonilla was the first director. Perched up on La Bufa Hill, probably for good viewing.
Did it have decent gear?
We know Bonilla had a telescope equipped for solar work and photography. His early interest was actually in sunspots, so he was set up for sun observation.
Okay.
Though, interestingly, it later became a meteorological observatory. Seems its focus shifted over the years. But back in 83, it was functional for this kind of work.
Even if no one else nearby could back up his findings.
Which is always the tricky part in science, needing that independent verification.
Okay, this is all super interesting now.
Yeah.
Let's touch on that other angle. The UFO connection. how does this 1883 event get pulled into that whole discussion?
Well, you can see why, can't you? Hundreds of unidentified objects photographed. It often gets listed as like one of the very first photographic pieces of potential UFO evidence.
All right, before the term UFO even existed, really.
Exactly. And people who lean that way, they often push back against the comet theory.
On what grounds?
They'll point to the sheer number of objects, maybe suggest the way they moved seemed coordinated, though that's an interpretation, obviously. They might argue the fuzzy look or the tails aren't really consistent with comets, or maybe question the parallax explanation more strongly.
Saying it doesn't fully explain the limited visibility.
Yeah. For some, the comet idea just doesn't quite cover all the weird details Bonilla reported. So the mystery remains, and, that leaves the door open for more unconventional interpretations.
Unidentified aerial phenomena.
Basically, it keeps the speculation alive for that community.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this up.
Yeah.
We have this amazing observation back in 1883. A respected astronomer, photos, detailed notes, initial reaction. Mostly skeptical. Maybe birds, maybe dust.
Standard procedure. Look for the simple explanation first.
Then, way later, this really compelling comet fragment theory comes along. Explains the parallax, the appearance, the tails, even suggests a massive near-miss for Earth.
A really elegant scientific explanation, potentially.
But it's got its own issues. No meteor storm, questions about visibility, the brightness off the disks.
Right, the critiques are valid and keep the debate going.
And because it's not 100% solved, it also lives on in this completely different context of early UFO lore. It really shows how we try to make sense of the unexplained, doesn't it?
Absolutely. This deep dive really pulls out a fascinating piece of scientific history. What Bonilla saw. It's still debated. It shows how hard it can be to interpret old data with new knowledge, and, well, it speaks to our ongoing fascination with cosmic mysteries.
It really does. This has been incredibly interesting, digging through these sources. It leaves me thinking, okay, we've got the science, we've got the speculation. What does this whole Bonilla story tell us about how we understand the universe and how we grapple with things we just can't quite explain yet?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Definitely something to chew on. A great reason to keep exploring these historical puzzles. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive.